In the spirit of reconciliation, Law Squared acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
Hello and welcome to AI Governance, Ensuring Safe Strategic Adoption at the Board Level. I'm your host, Annika Childs, Acting Head of Commercial at Law Squared. It's great to be with you again today as we discuss how AI is reshaping the modern boardroom and what directors need to know to use it responsibly. AI has the potential to optimise board processes and strengthen decision-making, but used poorly, it introduces new governance, legal and ethical risks. For directors, this requires more than technical curiosity. It demands a clear understanding of how boardroom use of AI intersects with fiduciary duties, independent judgement, and the fundamentals of good governance. This is a subject my colleague, commercial lawyer at Law Squared, Vladimir Kravchenko, is passionate about and recently co-wrote about in our latest blog, Governing AI and Using AI for Governance. If you haven't read it yet, we'll share a link in the sidebar over here. When he's not authoring commercial law blogs, Vlad draws on his deep experience in drafting, reviewing, and negotiating contracts across their full life cycle, alongside being an AI risks and governance practitioner. With a background as in-house counsel at one of Australia's largest companies, Vlad delivers clear, practical, and commercially attuned advice to clients across financial services, underwriting, and beyond. At Law Squared, Vlad also supports our Law Squared as a Service clients, acting as a trusted relationship manager for their ongoing contract and advisory needs. Welcome, Vlad.
Thank you, Annika. Delighted to be here.
Please also welcome Ivana Kovacevic. Have I said that right?
You have.
Great. Great. Fractional GC, board director and keynote speaker, as well as an established mentor in the legal community. Ivana brings over 20 years' experience across ASX top 20 organisations and leading law firms, including Freehills and Gilbert and Tobin, with deep Australian and international expertise in highly regulated industries. As a trusted mentor and advisor to C-suite and boards, Ivana has a strong track record in board reporting, strategic advice, privacy, crisis management, governance, modern slavery, and ESG. A multi-award-winning general counsel, recognised in GC 100 and GC Power lists, Ivana is widely respected for her leadership and impact. We warmly welcome Ivana. Thank you for being here with us.
So delighted to be here. Thank you for that intro, Annika.
No worries. And last, but certainly not least, Julie McLellan, advisor to boards and directors at the Director's Dilemma. As a leading governance expert and board director, drawing on her deep, extensive experience in governance, Julie delivers highly targeted education and development programs for company directors. She is the publisher of the world's largest director newsletter and is a strong advocate for practical governance that drives better outcomes. Julie's passion is maximising board and director impact, helping leaders focus on what truly matters, and building strong, effective organisations. We're delighted to have you with us today, Julie.
And I'm delighted to be here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. All right, so listeners, hopefully you know the drill by now. We've got just 1 hour for this webcast. So to help us manage time, please drop your comments and questions to our chat moderator, Alicia, in the sidebar to the right, and we'll respond with FAQs and resources after the webcast. All right, so before we dive into specifics, it's worth setting the scene on why AI has become such a live issue for boards over the last 12 to 18 months in particular. So within businesses, we're seeing a clear surge in adoption pressure, not just from management teams experimenting with tools, but from customers, staff, regulators and competitors moving faster than traditional governance frameworks were designed for. So unlike many prior technology waves, AI is arriving at speed, often bottom-up and frequently outside formal approval pathways. Vladimir, in your article, you describe this as the director's dilemma in relation to AI. So can you unpack what you mean by that? And from a board risk lens, what really makes AI different from other enterprise technologies that we've seen in the past?
Gladly, yes. To begin with, my use of the phrase director's dilemma is an obvious nod in the direction of Julie's.
Wasn't a happy coincidence,
Julie, but it also aptly describes the situation directors face here. So on the one hand, failure to embrace AI on the individual level of a director, on the level of the board, or for the business at large, where the board is responsible for voting on whether the business embraces AI or doesn't. So a failure to do so means that those people lose an important competitive advantage where their competitors do so. At the same time, there are opinions that I've been reading in academic articles as early as 2019 that soon not consulting an AI expert for a director could put them at risk of breaching their due diligence obligations. We're not quite there yet, but that might become a relevant consideration as well. On the other hand, boards are very cautious about using AI, and rightly so, in my opinion, because of the lack of understanding of the technology and of the legal and governance risks that are involved. And at a very high level, what makes AI different to traditional digital technologies such as software is that it's autonomous and it's self-adapting, and also produces probabilistic rather than deterministic results, such as a binary algorithm. So it's a lot more like a living organism than a set of permanent, predictable rules. When you look deep under the bonnet, AI has a number of unique characteristics or features, such as biases, the black box effect, its reliance on training data, model drift, that make it particularly risky.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So suddenly we see directors are hearing a lot of this very AI-specific terminology, often without a lot of clarity around where the real governance risk actually sits. So where do boards tend to get burned in practice? You touched on a couple of things there. There's those kind of familiar risks that we're starting to know about around hallucinations, obviously privacy and data security, but are there any other AI-specific issues that deserve board-level attention? Can you unpack a few of those a little bit more?
Going back to bias, AI models are trained on human-generated data, and that data can reflect social, cultural, geographic, or institutional biases. And that's why most commentators in this space will emphasize the importance of data quality and its relevance. So, for example, if you are using a model for market analysis, and it's been trained on South America's markets, on data relating to those markets, it's unlikely to be very relevant or accurate when applied to Australian markets. And it's very important to scrutinize that underlying data. In addition to this, the providers of AI use learning and fine-tuning algorithms to make those LLMs more useful to humans, and that can also pass on the designer biases. For example, Elon Musk's famous fine-tuning, let's call it that, of Grok, has led to that LLM making some very questionable, if not appalling, statements because it was programmed to be less politically correct. And another typical example of a bias is Google's AI tool Gemma, not so long ago, famously downplayed women's health issues while describing men's cases with a lot more urgency and in using much more compelling language. And that's because of the data it's been trained on that traditionally, favor men, to put it simply. Then there's the related black box issue, that's linked to this, and it can be summed up as that we don't really know what's going on underneath the bonnet and how a model arrives at an answer. It's kind of like getting a verdict from a sealed jury. You get the result, but the internal logic is hidden.
Mm-hmm.
And that's both because AI is extremely complex. There are billions of neuro links involved, billions of parameters basically, and often because the underlying data and fine-tuning is withheld by the providers of AI for commercial or contractual reasons. And then linked to that is this issue of explainability. You hear this word a lot in the context, but what it means is that even if you can overcome the black box issue by compelling disclosure from the designers and you scrutinize the data and you know what the biases are, the technology is just so complex that it would be impracticable, if not impossible, to explain why one word or decision followed another. So AI's outputs in this sense are kind of like intuition. Something might feel right, but you couldn't explain what the reason for the outcome is. And why are these features a legal problem? Well, in high-stakes environment and the financial services, lending, or healthcare, if you can't explain an AI-driven decision, for example, how you choose to give someone a loan or not, or how you interpret a diagnosis, you can fall short of the relevant standards. And more broadly, you erode trust and accountability in your business. So just to provide a legal example, under the Corps Act, for example, there's the general conduct obligation for financial licensees to provide their services efficiently, honestly, and fairly. And it's been widely argued that unless you overcome these bias and black box issues, you'd be hard-pressed to demonstrate your compliance with fairness. The same issue applies to AML-CTF regimes, where you need to show, for example, grounds for a suspicion in the context of suspicious transactions, and consumer law also turns up similar problems. So, and in addition to these features, there's two more worth discussing. There's hallucinations that you've mentioned, Annika, and the word probably needs a little bit of demystification. LLMs hallucinate as a result of the underlying technology on which they're based. So these models typically generate text by predicting the most probable word or sequence of words and not by checking facts. So it's the most probable pattern in its training that a model will produce and will produce confidently rather than an accurate answer. So, and that's why we're running into problems like made up case references in legal submissions, or, books that academic texts that don't exist referenced in the latest Deloitte report that was widely discussed by the media. So it's a byproduct of the LLM trying to produce a probable answer that will please the reader. And the last AI-specific risk is its narrowness. So LLMs are brilliant at generating texts based on the patterns in its data, but it doesn't really understand the world beyond that data and can't really reason beyond that scope. So, for example, if there's a fire in the building, it won't be able to know that and respond to that while a board meeting is taking place. So it will go on giving you great or not great advice without regard to an immediate danger that human actors in the real world will be aware of. I've been talking for a while now, so I'll.
No, that's great. That's great, Vlad. It's a good foundation. So if that's the, I suppose, the technology risk canvas that we're looking at, the natural next question is, I suppose, how do our time-tested governance principles hold up in this new environment? Because I suppose while AI as we know it now increasingly might be new, the board's core obligations haven't really changed that much. I suppose what has changed is the pace, complexity, and delegation profile in the technology that we're seeing. So I'd like to, I suppose, turn to what is the board's role versus management's role in AI strategy, risk appetite, and oversight. And Julie, I'd love to start with you. If this new risk, in this new risk landscape, how should boards be thinking about their role versus management's role when it comes to AI strategy, setting risk appetite, and that ongoing oversight as well?
Good questions. If I go back to the very first question in your thread, which was, how do our time-tested and trusted governance first principles hold up in this new environment? The answer is very well if you apply them. And the difficulty with AI is that people are very tempted to stop applying those principles because it's AI and it's new and it's different. So really remember, as a director, your job is to do what's in the best interests of the company. You need to therefore know what those interests are. You need to know that what you're doing is in those interests and think through the risks of doing that and make sure that you can handle them. And then you need to document what you've done so that if anyone ever comes asking because you did have an adverse outcome, you can say, this is what we did, this is how we did it, this meets the standards of care and diligence. And so when a board says, oh yes, this was the best answer, but they can't say why or how, and they can't prove that they spent a reasonable amount of time given the risks of the decision, that becomes very hard to defend, particularly against hindsight that proves that it was actually a wrong decision, even if it was correctly taken. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, Ivana, Vlad, if you want to kind of jump in around that board versus management role, just to continue on with that. Yeah. Ivana, I might throw to you.
Excellent. Thank you. I mean, I love that, Vlad, you said such a good basis for the discussion. And Julie, you've given us a great intro into boards. And just to build on Julie's response also in terms of roles and what the directors need to do and what management needs to do, the law, in a sense, hasn't changed, meaning that there is no overarching AI legislation. The laws are already there. We just now need to apply them to AI. So to Julie's point, things are already in place. We just need to apply them, right? So this is through privacy laws, consumer protections, IP, discrimination, etc. And so where I think the really interesting twist happening at the moment, which goes to your question, is the role of the board versus management. And so traditionally, management is tasked with the day-to-day operations. The board is there to set strategy, protect long interests of the company, look after risk appetite statements, so kind of oversee the work of management. But I think what's happening with AI, very interestingly, and I think, Vlad, this is what was also in your article, up until now, perhaps we've had kind of front-end companies using AI to boost sales. So using it front-end, how do we get more money? What do we do? New products? What do we produce? But it's now also the task for directors to not only govern, make sure that from an AI compliance, we have a good strategy that's going to deal with all of the issues that we've discussed. But boards are now realizing that, hey, wait a second, AI can also be used by us to help us with governance. So I think the boards are not only dabbling in, we're going to set a strategy and good governance for how AI applies and what we do with AI in this company, but we can use it to get better insights, to govern the company better. So I think it's a really interesting twist that's happening while at the same time, the two actually, management and board, have slightly different roles.
Perhaps just to add to that, what that's likely to do, if it hasn't already done, and by this I mean boards using AI to analyze the business's data, is that it can give boards insights into the minutiae of how the business has been run on an unprecedented level and beyond what's in the board pack. So traditionally, the management would prepare a board pack for the directors, and they'd be limited to the information contained in those board packs. If a board adopts AI for governance, it could, in theory, have the ability to request live information to, question something in the board pack or, go deeper. And that really undermines the divide between management and boards. And what would be important is for a company to set clear protocols on what can and can't be done, so that that distinction is preserved and there's no tension in the relationships.
That's a brilliant point, Vlad. And I was going to add to that. I think early on you were talking about just general AI risks. And I think we're now dabbling in the kind of next level up. So there are risks with use of AI, but what does it mean for the board? What are the additional risks when it comes to board using it? So you've just flagged a brilliant example of merging board and management duties, and then we need to be careful of that. But there's a few more that I thought I'll just sprinkle through. And Annika, maybe this is one of the questions coming up later, but I thought with recording of minutes or using AI to help with that, that's another thing that is kind of unique to boards, that unless you have human in the loop, for one thing, starting point, don't just let AI run wild and do something without someone checking it. But also, once AI has helped you, you now have multiple records, possibly a recording, a first draft that AI did that lost nuance of what a person can get. So you need to have good document retention strategies to make sure that you destroy everything that's not the true ultimate source of information. Another risk is that boards, and this is possibly not unique to boards, but that boards might defer to AI as, this is the very powerful thing that uses science. So whatever input it provides, we'll just defer to that. And it might stifle diversity of thought. So something to keep in mind there is get your directors to voice opinions first before you get AI input. You might get shadow director use, which I think you alluded to before, that at the moment, a lot of companies are not allowing their directors to use AI. So directors are dabbling with AI on the side. So A, are they doing it in a safe way? But B, are you now creating a disparity of what directors are doing on your board? You have someone who's got this capacity, someone who doesn't. So there's a few more risks that I think, and I probably haven't covered them all, but that are unique also to how the board applies use of AI that go on top of everything else that Vlad already told us about.
I think it's true. The board environment is very, very different to a normal management environment. And the risks, particularly with things like AI generating papers, AI generating summaries of papers, people using AI to take 5 dot points and write a paper. And if you don't constantly go back to that, why am I telling this to the board? What do the board need to know? And what do I need the board to do with this information? You can wind up with an absolute travesty of machines talking to each other and humans looking at dot points. The role of the board is to make the choices that create the future for the organization. And that's not my wisdom. That's something that Stephen Bowman often says. But when you think about that, what choices is your board making about AI? What is being given to you as a decision, pretty much take it or leave it, because that's not really a choice. The costs of being left behind are too high. I believe there's a court case going through Delaware at the moment of a company that was becoming insolvent, and when they've gone back to look at meetings, there are 2 different AI transcripts that two directors without permission recorded, and realities of recording people when they don't know you're recording are quite clear. That changed. But not only that, the two transcripts disagree with each other as well as with the official minutes. But anything that casts your minutes into doubt is dangerous. The only person I have seen so far, and it could just be that I haven't seen enough, but the only one I've seen so far that's created good board minutes entirely from AI and a recording of the meeting, first of all, sandboxed the PC that did it. It was not connected to the internet. It was trained on the company's law because that director's in the UK. It was trained on the company's website, downloaded. It was trained on all of the company's policies, processes. It was trained on general corporate governance and had quite a few governance texts uploaded. It was then trained on minuting and what's important and what's not, and what's a decision and what's an action and what are matters. His prompt was 6 pages long after all that training. And yeah, you dropped your transcript in and like magic out came some pretty good minutes. But they also came with a decisions register, a matters arising, and an audit log that was 56 pages long, that for every sentence in the minutes was able to say, this is here because of this law or this policy or because it's important or because it's delegating power. If you're not prepared to do that depth of work to get those minutes, you're at risk of substandard minutes, which are a very dangerous thing to be at risk of. And really, until the board portals or someone else out there in AI development land does all of that work for you in your specific jurisdiction with your specific policies, my advice is use a really good company secretary and consider yourselves very fortunate to have access to them.
Julie, may I ask a question about this specific, very thorough and considered and sort of flawless from a governance point of view use of AI? Was there a human in the loop as well? So did someone then read the minutes and sign off on them?
Yes, he actually used recordings from 3 meetings and compared what the AI did to the human minutes from the 3 meetings and tweaked his prompt, all 6 pages of it, until his AI was coming up with minutes that they felt were actually better than the company secretary was producing. But that sort of 3-month project with that depth of computing expertise for his company was appropriate. I can't identify him, but it was appropriate for him and his company, given what they do and what they're interested in. For most of us, a good old-fashioned human intelligence is an awful lot cheaper and easier to interface with. So whilst the AI is coming, it's coming more in other areas. And the bit that really excites me is this whole agentic AI, agent-driven commerce. If your clients start using agents to purchase and you're not able to use agents to sell, you could suddenly lose a huge chunk of your turnover almost overnight when somebody switches this on. If you're using AI to buy things and you haven't set it up right, so better things come available, but your AI agents aren't looking for better things, they're doing what they do, you can get strategically sidelined by your market. So understanding AI from the strategic business viewpoint rather than from, I'm a manager, I've got this project, I've got to do this, it's got to deliver that, and I've got to do it in this time frame and under this budget. That's a very different mindset to the mindset of the board saying, oh, what are the implications? Strategically, where does this lead? What does it open up? What does it close down? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? And is that therefore in the best long-term interest of this company?
Ivana, I know you've done a lot of thought leadership in this space in particular. And you touched on it before. Obviously, there's a growing view that because of both the risks and opportunities involved with AI, that there needs to be more of a top-down, centralized approach rather than it emerging organically or being left to kind of individual teams, like you touched on, Julie. So I guess it raises a few important questions around leadership and, you know, like you said, Julie, the mindset shifts required to drive responsible adoption, and how we think about people skills as AI becomes more and more prevalent. So I guess, Ivana, how does effective AI adoption need to be led from the top? And what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, good question. And I actually thought as Julie was speaking that she was giving a really good example of the fact that AI requires a lot of work, like what you described in terms of how well, you know, to get the governance right, to get the output to be what it needs to be, it requires a lot of work. And so the statistics out there, if you read reports, a number of reports we issued last year that say that return on investment is really not there yet. And that kind of that example that Julie gave was almost a perfect example of, yes, you can get marvelous things out of AI, but you still are putting a lot more in until you get the marvelous output. So MIT did a study that where only 5% of CIOs said that they were seeing return on investment. Everyone else said, no, we're not there yet. And so these reports also give you the reasons for why that's the case. And there isn't a single silver bullet that solves everything, but the biggest chunk of the reason is actually people and engagement with people. So part of it is training, but part of it, I think, comes down to leadership. So part of it is just adoption. So AI is a great tool. It's a wonderful tool. It can do marvelous things if you program it right for the long enough period of time, as Julie explained, but you also have to get people to be comfortable using it. And so I kind of thought about this issue a while back and wrote a paper where I was thinking, what are the people issues? What are the people steps that are involved in getting to that adoption? And I started with people like myself. The starting point is, what do you as a leader think when AI comes on board? Do you, like many, go, I am not an expert, which happened to me. And I have a advanced science degree on top of law. So you would have thought, well, maybe I'd be more comfortable. I've led legal operations projects before, dealt with legal technology, but I had the same, I'm not an expert, I will sit back. And so I think part of the challenge is shifting your mindset. So you start with you before you propagate it elsewhere and go, you don't have to be an expert. And in fact, anyone who becomes an expert in 3 weeks, they're no longer an expert because AI is moving so fast. So I think you need to challenge yourself first to go, you don't have to have all the answers. Action is leadership. So you need to step in that space before you feel ready for it. And then I think the task becomes, well, then how do you then go from your mind shift to your team? And what I thought was critical there was psychological safety. So the number one determining factor of whether a team is high performing or not is not their IQ, is not how long they've worked together. It's not how long they've been at the company. It's whether they feel psychologically safe. And what does that mean? Fancy word for saying, are you comfortable to be yourself? Are you comfortable to fail, to be curious, to ask questions in your workplace? So if we create environments that are psychologically safe, rather, what we are creating is an environment where people are happy to dabble. AI is new. People are scared. They don't know how to do it. They're scared of making mistakes. They're scared that AI might replace them. So there's a whole heap of people issues that we need to nail down first before we can get people to use AI. And then the third thing that I thought was really important was just this is another change management thing. And while AI is unique in the ways that we have discussed so far, it's also just another change management initiative. And we've done many of those in the past. And so in my career, what I've found to be really powerful is if you want adoption, you focus on the why first. Not at the end, not after you've done all the work, but you focus on the why, and you do it in two ways. One is the kind of logic. We're doing it because this will achieve better results for the company. It aligns with strategy. But the second one is I really want people to be hooking their teams and their staff in the heart hook. What's in it for the people? If you can link that to a way that your team can grow faster, can get rid of mundane work, can get promotions faster. If there is a heart hook, then you get better adoption. So I think that as leaders, you have to kind of go through the stages of fixing yourself first, fixing your team, and then figuring out how do you get influence, adoption, engagement in the best possible way.
Yeah, it's what it unlocks for you, right? It's interesting, and a lot of the pilots we've done, the biggest wins that we've celebrated are just people getting better at prompting. It's not necessarily about the output. It's when, hey, they didn't change my prompt that much. That was a win. So I suppose it's about celebrating those little steps that get you kind of the better results as you go along. You've also, I suppose, spoken about in the past, Ivana, the importance of people skills, and you touched on it a little bit there. I suppose just to elaborate on that, if you could, why are people skills so important now within this AI era in particular?
Yeah. Another good question close to my heart. I've always, in my career, I've always kind of been a proponent of people skills as the things that differentiate you. So for young lawyers coming into the profession, we all start with having to be technically brilliant. And so the thing that we need on top is people skills. So you can be a brilliant lawyer, but if you can't get your message digested well enough and understood well enough by the board or by your managing director, then all your marvelous legal skills just go to waste. So it's the people skills, it's the communicating, it's listening to understand what really the problem is, it's knowing how to resolve conflicts, things of that nature, to create psychological safety, to collaborate. Those are the things that elevate you from being technically brilliant to actually having impact, whether you're in-house or in private practice. And I think with AI coming on top of that, I think this becomes even more relevant because, hey, AI can't do people skills. It's brilliant at put an input in and it blurts something out. But if Jenny and Tom are having a fight, it's not AI that's going to help you. It's your conflict resolution skills. You have to go and do it. If someone is telling you a problem, it's listening for the things that they're not saying, that you're uncovering what the true problem is. So it's the people skills that differentiate us from AI, that are the things that AI can't do, which I think gives us the competitive edge. The more there is AI, the more we rely on AI. These are the things that will distinguish us and make us marketable and competitive.
Julie, do you have anything just to build on that in terms of then bringing that to the board level in particular?
Yeah, I think the people skills, they are fundamental, but one of the top roles of the board within the company, one of the things you actually do is set the culture. And that means defining what is and what isn't acceptable behavior, how things will be done. And you do a lot of that by modeling it yourselves. Not many people see that modeling. It's a very private little catwalk that you're on. But the CEO, your choice of the CEO, your interventions with the CEO around things. And I loved that Ivana talked about change management, because when you go through a process of change management, it's almost like a process of grief. There's that initial period of no, that's not how we do it. No. And then there's, why do you keep saying yes when I'm saying no, and frustration comes in. And then there's despair. Oh my gosh, it's actually going to happen. no matter what I say, followed by depression that I couldn't make a difference, followed by, oh, actually, building confidence, curiosity, experimentation, until finally you get either acceptance or, better still, overall support and embrace. And your communications need to change. I hear the start with why, but actually sometimes when you've got your why and the person's just saying no, you have to say yes, or there's the door. Those moments are the ones that can really make the difference in how your staff actually embrace things. When somebody's deep in despair, telling them about all of the wonderful things that other people are getting because they've adopted the change faster isn't going to help. Acknowledging the difficulty they're going through and giving them just one or two practical things. So having that confidence to vary what you're doing so that people feel valued, feel heard, and feel supported. And yes, a lot of jobs are going to disappear because of AI. But the truth is, those are pretty horrible jobs. I've never been a young lawyer. I've been a young civil engineer. But actually going and reading through journals to find a precedent that suits the pleading you wish to make, that must be hours of work for the occasional little bit of outcome. The same with doing finite element analysis with a calculator, a pencil, and a rubber. Because in my day, computing was optional when I did my degree. It's not optional anymore, and computers do your finite element analysis for you. But the problem with that is, if you've programmed it wrong, your damage will fall down. So actually understanding what it is your people are going through, and if AI is going to cost jobs, providing better, nicer jobs for those people, rather than just chucking them out the door and replacing them with a computer. As a board, you're the custodian of your company, but you're also the custodian of society. I really think the limited liability company has been the biggest and most valuable driver of change. It's allowed every other change to be delivered at scale. And so really thinking through, what's the role of my company in this? What impact do we want to have? Even if I'm a tiny little not-for-profit, what impact do I want to have? Where does AI sit with that? Where does it help? Where does it hinder? And how do I look after my people through that transition so that we build a better world afterwards? Sorry.
No, that's great. I guess what really stands out with a lot of the kind of use cases that you've brought to us is that most of them aren't inherently good or bad. It's really around, the strength of the governance around it. So I guess then if boards are to use AI credibly, I guess let's touch on kind of the core. What the core kind of guardrails are around that. So, for example, what policies and processes matter most at the outset, but then also, like we've touched on, AI isn't this kind of set and forget thing as well. So, I guess what are the kind of pitfalls that you've seen or that you'd expect to arise as well that boards need to be mindful of? Yeah,
I mean, Vladimir did a really good job of running through some of those pitfalls. The historical bias. I dropped my photo into, I think it's called Mid-Journey, an AI engine, and I said, here's my photo, make me look more like a company director, make it photorealistic. And immediately I became a man.
Wow.
My blouse turned into a shirt and tie. I had an Adam's apple. I had designer stubble and glasses. I was not impressed. But that, and you look at it, it's not the AI's fault. If you look at company directors from the beginning of computing in the 1960s, when corporates first started to embrace it, the photos of company directors are probably 90% male. And AI uses big data sets. If I'd said, make me look like a modern company director, I would have got a completely different outcome. And so understanding that you're not dealing with intelligence, you're dealing with a very sophisticated machine. And there's a difference. Humans make sense of their surroundings because that's how we survive in our environment. AI doesn't need to do that. And I was totally and utterly absorbed the other day in a really interesting documentary about somebody who was using neural processing, so actual brain cells cultured in a Petri dish, and using that as a computer, which gives you the power you need for AI without the massive electricity that you need for the current sort of computers. But he said, in order to make the cells want to do something, you had to provide a reason. Whereas with AI, you just tell it to do something and it does. So he had to make his brain cells in his Petri dish want to play Pong by killing them if they missed the ball. And then he said, but as they've now got more sophisticated and they've started to become they're aware that I can die if I don't do this right. I've got a limited existence. He said, if I kill them, ethically, is that right? If they start thinking that I'm going to kill them, ethically, am I being cruel? And I mean, okay, he is 20 years ahead of us in the way he's thinking about AI and the things he's doing. But an intelligent machine, I'm of the generation that watched Space Odyssey 2001, and I remember Hal begging, please don't pull my transistors out, Dave. Dave, you're killing me. Please don't.
My mind is going, Dave.
Dave. But on the other hand, Hal opened those bow doors because ultimately there was a program, and I love going back to Asimov's rules. I wish boards would use them. A robot must obey a human. A robot must not hurt a human. A robot must look after itself. And the only reason to disobey these rules is if it would hurt someone, which is fine until the military starts sending robots to war with a very modified set of instructions. So again, AI only amplifies our own intelligence, and it doesn't just amplify our intelligence, it amplifies our basic human drivers. And some of those are not very nice. So we need to be very, very careful when we let loose something that has no morals, no conscience, no human feelings. When we create something like that, how much power we give it and for how long, because AI is now self-learning and self-programming and self-developing. And that comes back to how much we as humans are really thinking through the implications of what we're doing and why. And when you're on a board, what does that mean for this company? And I love the word company because a company is a group of people.
I thought that was so great. It was a great story. I was so in your story, Julie. But it's a great example also of rules that we need to set. And so I thought this is the fact that there should be rules on how we use AI is really important. So if I translate that to the board, one of the things that I also think is the board needs to have a policy about how it uses AI over and above the general policy for the company because of the specific things that we've discussed in this forum already, one of which was just the fact that board can dip into management information, so without some care. So we need to have rules about what are we going to use it for, what are we not going to use it for. But also when it comes to rules, I think that the role of the chair and the role of company secretariat are going to be incredibly important. They're maybe not rule setters, but they're going to guide the board. So in the case of the chair, to know when to dip into AI and when to let directors have open discussion, to know that this is actually not the right question to ask AI. And I think this is possibly also where company secretariat is going to be very busy, especially with companies that are very AI advanced, because while AI might assist company secretariat with some of the low-level admin things like minutes, provided they're done the way we've discussed, right? Human in the loop, you check them, you destroy everything else after. I think company secretariat will have more time to then focus on the more strategic stuff, and that is set those rules that we talked about how the board should be safely using all of these tools. So I think there is lots of room for proper governance. That too is proper governance that will apply specifically to boards outside of the setting of how AI applies to the rest of the company. So lots to watch.
Huge amount.
Vlad, what other kind of tools or education are you seeing as being kind of the most important at that, for the board, for the company secretary, so that there is that effective and safe implementation?
Sure. I'd love to maybe respond or provide some footnotes on what Julie and Ivana have been saying. Maybe I won't be as poetic and articulate as Julie. But in terms of AI amplifying our biases and being this evolving, self-adaptive creature, if you like, and you've mentioned this in your question, Annika, that we shouldn't just treat it as a set and forget type of thing. There's this phenomenon called model drift, and as someone who's negotiating contracts a lot, I'm starting to see contracts trying to control this notion of model drift. I've particularly over the last half a year, I've had 3 to 4 contracts where people were trying to set the parameters for what it means. And so as the AI tool evolves over time, it's adaptive, it's permitted to be adaptive, and as data changes, because often more data is allowed it can train on further data, and so it starts changing the way it creates and presents outputs. And a very basic example that's easy to understand is if you've used Spotify or YouTube, there's like a random radio feature that's meant to give you, a random selection of songs. Over time, as you keep using Spotify, it starts to learn about your music tastes, and the random feature becomes less random. It starts feeding you more and more of the stuff that you want. Then, and kind of amplifies, who you are. And there's a recent, it's a couple of years old now, Trivago case. Trivago, it is a travel website business that is meant to offer consumers the best deals. And it got fined something like 44 million because its AI algorithm was, over time, started becoming skewed in favoring deals that were most profitable for the company rather than the most economical or best deal for the consumer. So you run into these sort of misleading and deceptive conduct issues. And so to govern model drift, you need this kind of adaptability. You need to have controls in place and testing. You need to test a model regularly to ensure that its outputs don't deviate from what's fit for your purpose. And then in terms of what's fit for your purpose, I agree with our esteemed guests that it should come from the top. So the board has to have a very thorough think about how it wants to use AI, if at all, and then what the purpose is and define it for the organization. From a purely sort of black letter law risk perspective, that's likely to ensure much better governance without gaps. If you have a centralized, holistic, sort of top-down approach rather than sporadic, random use of technology that's not governed. And in terms of how you can do that, what are the tools and tricks out there? Most organizations already have, very developed, complex risk and governance frameworks. There are policies that govern, privacy, risk. There are delegation frameworks. All of those could be updated to reflect the business's chosen AI use, or you could have one centralized AI policy that would, govern all users of AI. On the level of adoption, I would recommend that all businesses implement algorithmic impact assessments. So it's a concept that will be familiar to people who've done privacy impact assessments or environmental impact assessments. You basically look at a proposed use and analyze it from the point of view of risk that's relevant to your business. Is it going to disrupt our third-party contractual obligations? Is there regulatory risk in using this? What's the level of comfort we need in terms of this tool being transparent or not biased, etc.? So you would perform that for each adopted use of AI. So that's, and then it's a good idea, and I've read this a lot, including in guidance from ASIC, for an organization to set sort of an AI leader, as it were, kind of like you have a privacy officer in an organization. So one of the C-suite should be the person accountable for it, because you don't want a situation where decisions are made by AI and there's no one accountable in the business. You need, that's pretty much it, I would say.
Just jump in on one point. Sorry, I was just going to elaborate on the AIAs or the PIAs and how effective they are getting the full picture. So as someone who's done a lot in privacy, so I've seen a lot of privacy impact assessments, which is the analogous to AIAs. What is really important is that it helps you figure out, quite often when you want to use something, you don't have it all mapped out in your head. So these assessments are a brilliant way to actually map the data flows, figure out what you're doing, how you're doing it. So further put that on paper, and that's when all the risks will also pop out. That enables you to find the gaps, and then very importantly, come up with strategies to close those gaps. So they're just a beautiful way to actually map out what the project is and understand it from beginning to end. So I was just going to say, I love that concept, and that's kind of step one of many things that also need to happen.
Yeah, I endorse that. And also, you need to test your outcomes regularly and routinely. You probably need to go back and look at AI more often than any other policy that you've set, because of the way in which it operates. And also because even when you do your impact assessment and you do your mapping and you do your data flow, you're doing it with your own current knowledge. And we don't know what we don't know.
I've got lots more questions, but I suppose I have to start wrapping you up. But I'd love to just quickly go around and just for everyone to just give one kind of main practical takeaway for board members before we close out. So maybe starting with you, Ivana.
Oh, pressure's on. I was just thinking there's so many. I need a minute. Maybe the key message I would say is just that there are additional things that boards need to think about. So if this is a session about boards and their adoption, I think the key message is there are all of the AI concerns that apply to governance that Vlad did such a great job of summarizing. It's just realizing that when it comes to board adopting AI, there are additional risks, so boards need to be privy and thinking about specifically to what applies to them, so they don't miss those things. And I would also say talk about it openly in the boardroom. What should we be doing? How should we be doing it? Where should the limits be? So have open discussions. Don't have shadow use of AI. Have an open discussion, set policies, and think about how it applies to you.
Julie.
Yeah, great points, Ivana. Getting AI into the open is really important. Nobody's born knowing how AI works, not yet. So educate your board and don't all do the same course, because then you'll all get the same biased bit of learning. Send one director online to do the Microsoft AI Academy. Send another one on to Google to find the best free AI training. Send one who's got a bit more money to do the Institute of Company Directors AI Fluency course. Send another one to do the Governance Institute course. Send one to the College of Laws to look at some of the legal implications for governance in AI. Get multiple perspectives, because if you've only got one view, you're going to make a really bad mistake, and probably sooner rather than later. So don't stop learning. As a board, if you start saying, we haven't got the time to learn, you're pretty much saying, we don't care about this company. And you should care. It's your legal duty.
I love that tip. I'm just jumping in before Vlad has a chance. I'm going to use it. I'm going to make sure that we have diversity of training. That's a brilliant point.
I mean, there's benefits in the whole board having the session together, because then you talk about things and you all get the insights. But there's also benefits in a program where each director has a different piece of the pie and you put it all together. Do both. Don't limit your training. Don't limit your learning. Yeah, it's important.
Vlad, one last tip from you.
My tip on the same theme was going to be a lot more rudimentary than Julie's. I was going to say, don't limit your training to AI prompts, learn about governance. But I think Julie just offered a much more nuanced and better advice in that regard. But I would then also encourage boards to choose how they're going to adopt AI from a strategic point of view, and whether they're going to uplift existing policies, the existing framework, or draft a centralized AI policy for their business that will cover all uses, including the board's own use. That would probably be a separate policy specifically for using AI for governance that only the boards would be privy to and not the business at large. And I would design an algorithmic impact assessment that takes the business's specific risks into account and start using it.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you. Yeah, go for it.
If you're making a change, don't let the technical people be the only experts you refer to. When you've decided exactly what the change is and you've written it down and the whole board's understood it, run it past a lawyer. I shouldn't have to say this on a law square. So many boards get the technical advice, they make the decision and they implement it, and then they show their lawyer what they've done. They go, oh, if you'd done this, you'd be much safer now. So, yeah, run things, get legal advice, get human resources advice. Don't just do technical and business advice.
Couldn't agree more with that, Julie.
Great tip. Yeah, thanks for the plug, Julie.
You know what? I'll build on that even more, that AI is not just a technical issue. I think that's the key thing. It's a board thing. It's a people issue. It is a legal issue. So I think thinking of AI as technical only is where we falter. It's much broader. It's much bigger. We all need to be part of the pie that makes decisions.
We do.
Thank you. Thank you. Some great practical insights into AI in the boardroom, along with kind of some safe, actionable steps for our listeners to take away. So thank you. And thanks to you, to our viewers. I've seen a number of questions come through. So some we've answered, but we'll review them after this and send you through a response in our FAQs in the next couple of days. But yeah, before we wrap up, a quick reminder, as Julie kind of touched on, that if you do need support in AI adoption or where kind of poor use may introduce governance, legal or ethical risk, Vlad, myself and the wider commercial team at Law Squared will be happy to help. So we'll pop our contact details in the chat section as well. But yes, that's it from us. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.